What's going on, everyone? In today's podcast episode, I'm super excited to bring you Dave Chung. He has been in the community for a while. He's been selling since the mid-2000s. He's the founder and the president of Dream Books Company, which is a top 100 Amazon seller. He's also formerly a co-host of the Scout IQ team and also formerly a co-host of the Books and Bourbon podcast. So he's somebody who's got a ton of knowledge. He's a really big seller. I don't think a lot of people have heard too much about his story, even though he's kind of one of the three of the Scout IQ team. But I just know that having met him back at the Miami Sellers Conference early this year, that he's got a ton of value to share. He's just a super genuine person who wants to help over now. So Dave, thank you so much, man, for being here on the channel.
Hey, thanks for having me, Joji.
Yeah, cool. So I know you started back in the early mid 2000s. And I know a lot of people start with cherry picking. They go to thrift stores, they go to library sales. I know back then you're using the Dell Axe PDA. I guess one of my questions first is, can you give us a little insight into what did cherry picking look like back then in the earlier days when there was maybe less competition? Maybe kind of how has it changed now?
Yeah, I look back, we just finished, we just celebrated 15 years in business, which is absolutely crazy. Thanks. Yeah. But looking back, it really doesn't feel like that long of a time at all, but it definitely was different, right? Smartphones were just coming out.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, cherry picking was different. I was actually talking to another pretty large bookseller who actually started in the late 90s, actually.
Wow.
And he and I were just reminiscing, and he was talking about how he would write down ISBNs onto a piece of paper and then type it in at the library. And I know Reezy, and I had a very similar story. So it was a totally different business back then. But I think the opportunities were different. The technology was different, and yeah, it was just totally different.
Yeah, sounds good. So I know that eventually you did transition from cherry picking to buying pallets at Goodwill. And in a former interview, I think with Bill, it might have been a couple years ago as well, he said that, I might be wrong, but you paid like maybe $150 a pallet back then, which kind of seems pretty expensive to buy a pallet of books. But I'm curious, what are some lessons that you or what are some stories or some good memories you have, like in that beginning transition to going from a cherry picker and then trying to transition to like the bulk business route?
Yeah, what's funny is like on the Facebook groups, you see these people asking like, "Hey, where should I get Gaylords of books?" And
yeah,
the most common reply is like, "Go figure it out yourself." It's kind of like, you could come off kind of as an asshole, like when both on the asker side and then also the person who's answering the question. And back then, the business wasn't that much different. Like I remember going to the auctions behind the Goodwill, and there were two other booksellers there, Gary and Mike. I'm still friends with Mike to this day, and I remember going there, just out of high school, trying to figure this business out. And, I would ask them questions like, "Oh, like what type of book should I be pulling out? What should I be doing with this?" And they were like, I remember they're really nice guys, but in that moment, they were super rude, super cold, standoffish, didn't want to answer anything. Keep in mind, this was like, 20 years ago or 15 years ago. And I don't think the business has changed that much in the sense that like, the expectation is trial and error and, really figuring out the processes yourself. And so like, I think these communities and, these connections that you can make with others in the community are so powerful because it lets you leapfrog all of those headaches and all of those mistakes that you can make. But dude, honestly, like the business, it's so different, right? There's so many more tools, technology to just like improve your business, but at the heart of it, it's still the same. It's all about connections, relationships, and just using intuition. So, I can remember this story. It's like when we were a few years in at that point, and I remember I became close with the two guys that I was mentioning before, and then a new person came in to try to buy books. And up until that point, Gary, Mike, and we all agreed to not bid against each other, keep the prices low. And so,
Nice.
we're paying $50 to $70 per Gaylord, which, it was pretty cheap. And there would be times where, they'd have too much and they would sell them for $30, $40 a piece. And so that was a great deal. But one day a new person came in, and I remember like all three of us were like, we have to squeeze this person out. Otherwise, there's going to be a fourth person.
Yeah.
And so I remember for weeks, we were like bidding up to 150, 200, 250, which like back then was just absolutely outrageous.
Crazy.
I mean, even today, that's a lot of money. And so I remember we did that for a few weeks, and, that person finally left, and we were like, yes. But then like a few weeks later, a new person came in. So it's just like, I don't know. It's sort of at a young age, and also very early on in my career, that made me realize that, just being the competition that squeezes price, sometimes it works, but oftentimes it's not enough to, be a competitive advantage, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's funny. It's almost like a little storage auction, or Storage Wars, a very popular show a while back. That would have been interesting to see some video on pallets and Gaylords from Goodwill. I really think it's interesting how you talk about those first two guys, Mike, and I forget the name of the other guy, but this feeling of, there being like scarcity, right? Where it's like, hey, we figured out something that works. And anyone who's new is like, for good reason, you're like, I don't really want to be sharing my secrets with these people because I have a business, right? I have a family to feed. I'm curious, over the years, since you have been in business over the last 15 years, how has kind of your perspective changed on the abundance mindset versus the scarcity mindset with sharing information that you think is maybe too much value versus, wanted to also keep things to yourself? Because, like you got here because you worked hard and through trial and error, like you mentioned, and it's like, you want to keep your secrets to stay competitive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there are obviously things that you feel very comfortable sharing. I think there are a lot of things that everyone feels comfortable sharing, right? But I think there are definitely things that, you think twice about before sharing. And I think foundationally, there are no secrets in business, right? I mean, the basics of business, the foundations of how to build a great company, it's not so much a secret as it is more so, again, strategy, execution, just delivering correctly. Yeah. And so, I'll tell you the secrets right now, which is having a good team around you, right? Having access to good supply, having efficient processes, and just, a lot of it's operational, having access to liquidity and, having that financial knowledge. So, I mean, these are all secrets, quote unquote, secrets that build a great business. But, like building a great team, you look at just that, right? Mm-hmm. And for us, we have, I think, around 25 employees here at the company. And, and I guess even broadly across all my projects, I have a team of over 30 people now. And, one of the things that I've struggled with, and I still continue to struggle with, is like, how do you, number one, recruit talent? Yeah. And number two, how do you retain talent? Yeah. And that, I mean, it's just like, it's a puzzle every day, and you have to be creative. You have to be creative with how you schedule, compensation, benefits, how you develop talent within, your team. And so like, you look at all these things and it's like, yeah, you want a good team. And that's a secret in business. Right. Like, you need a great team, but the actual secret, quote unquote, secret, isn't so much in knowing what it is, but it's more so in the execution and how you strategize that aspect of it. So yeah, I kind of went off on a tangent.
No, that was great.
Yeah.
It leads into my next question, which is, you transition from the cherry picking, doing all the scanning and sorting yourself, to bringing on that team. I'm curious, what have been some of the major lessons that you've learned now, having gone through many, many years of hiring people, developing talent within? I'm sure you've had mistakes along the road, but along the way, what are some some things that you've definitely learned, one or two things that have been really important when it comes to bringing on people?
Yeah. For me, it was identifying what my objective is.
Okay.
I think so often, like, everyone falls into this trap of like going through the motions.
Okay.
Steps 1, 2, 3. Step 1, I need to get a warehouse. Step 2, I need to get supplies. Step 3, I need to hire people, bring them in, do that. And like, I think by being so process oriented, at times you can forget, where you're going, right? You can kind of just like turn into a zombie and just go into the motions. And so what I've experienced when that happens is there's a lot of confusion. I mean, there can be a lot of confusion from your team, and there's no clarity in who you're bringing into your team and where you're going. And so,
Gotcha.
yeah, I think the most important thing that I've learned over the last 15 years or so has really been figuring out what your intention is, or figuring out what your objective is.
Yeah.
Because that will sort of, by figuring that out, everything else falls into place. Even for hiring, we're going through this huge hiring thing right now, and we're actually overhauling our recruiting or employee life cycle.
Okay.
To focus more on development. And so we want to bring people who are excited into our organization. And we want to put them essentially through boot camp. So Dreambooks boot camp, where they learn all the different aspects of the job. And so that these guys and girls become eventually the future leaders of our company. And so again, like I've got this thesis in my mind now of like, hey, this is what I want.
Yeah.
And now I'm able to execute, as opposed to, I just want to bring good people in and we'll figure it out. Again, you're going to waste a lot of time, a lot of money. You're going to have a lot of turnover. And so, just having intention or end goal in mind is, I think, the most important thing.
I agree completely. One of the things I hear a lot in the Amazon space is people always comparing themselves to other people as well. And I think going back to what you talked about, like really focusing on the why of like, why are you doing it? So like, I know why I'm doing Amazon, guys. For me, it's that, my wife and I want to reach financial independence. And this is just honestly an amazing opportunity to make a little extra income. And that's my why. So even though there are guys that are selling way more than me, making way more money than me, that's my why. That's what I really focus on. So I appreciate your insight into that. Now, eventually, after you started bringing on a team, you founded, and you're now currently still the president of Dreambooks. So that's your company. It's a top 100 bookseller on Amazon, everyone. So this is no joke. Like, Dave is a massive seller. He, covers millions and millions of books every year. So my question for you is, you obviously partner with a whole bunch of local organizations, and I guess I'm curious, how have you sort of structured the deals with those organizations? Is it like, hey, we're just going to pick up all the books from you for free? Is it, we'll pay by the pound, we'll pay by the book? Is it that we'll work with a consignment deal? Like, kind of what's the different sort of, contracts you have with these different companies and organizations?
Yeah, boy, we've tried so many different things. In the beginning, I remember I was sitting down at a coffee shop just trying to figure out how I was going to structure, partnerships. And one of the first partnerships that we structured early on was a consignment arrangement. And the consignment was, we would pay X percentage of the total revenue. And so if we sold $100,000 worth of books on Amazon or eBay or wherever, we would give them 30 to 50% of that. It was just a fixed percentage.
Okay.
And so it went well for the first several months. And then the beginning of the year rolled around and everyone announced fee increases. Amazon, the Postal Service, everyone announced fee increases. And what happened was our expense structure per sale changed.
Okay.
But the partner still got that percentage off the top revenue line. And so I quickly learned that wow, they went from like, wow, this is an amazing deal to, oh my gosh, this is a horrible deal because,
Wow.
not only do I have to pay the organization the top line percentage, but then I have to figure out how I'm going to cover my expenses. And so we went
Right.
from, in a short amount of time, like making a ton of money to like within a year and a half, like burning through all that money because of the
Wow.
expenses. And so like how you structure these deals is so important. And I guess all I'll say is like we have so many different ways that we structure deals, and
Gotcha.
sometimes you have to be creative about it. But really it comes down to like listening to what these organizations and partners need, and being able to come up with like a flexible solution for them is the most important, I'd say.
That very, very cool. Now, we talk about, or you specifically talked about the importance of relationships, and it comes up, it's a recurring theme. Even, Avery, Roma the Roamer, has these book selling boot camps, which you've been on, I've been on as well. Everyone who's there has a network, and they talk about how networks have helped them. So I guess my question to you is, could you kind of walk us through, how did you land that first big deal with an organization? Like, this might be the one that you're talking about, the consignment deal, but I know so many people, mentally they get bottlenecked after, like, how do I go out and talk to someone? How do I land that first deal? Because I'm sure it's not the first person you call up or talk to is going to say yes. There's probably some trial and error to it. And I'm just curious your thoughts on
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, the first big deal, I can't remember exactly how I landed. It happened so long ago, but I can share some memorable deals. I remember walking into at the time. The Salvation Army used to have a warehouse here in Denver, and I feel comfortable saying that now because they no longer exist.
Okay.
But they had a warehouse here, and I remember I went in, and the manager's name is Sean McGaul. He was a manager at the time.
Okay.
I remember walking in back in maybe 2012, 2013, saying, "Hey, I'm interested in buying books from you guys, and I'd love to figure out a way to do it exclusively."
Yeah.
And he was like, number one, I was in my early 20s, and I looked young, I looked super green, and so he sort of brushed me off, and he was like, "All right, well, why don't you come back maybe a week later? I'm busy this week." And a week later, I showed up, and he was like, kind of shocked, and he talked. He said, "Hey, look, we already work with some people that we really like, but just check back every now and then." So literally every 3 months, I would go back and I'd say, "Hey, I'd love an opportunity to work with you guys." And I went every 3 months, and then that wasn't working, so I went every 6 months, and that didn't really bear any fruit. And fast forward to 2018, so almost 5 years later.
Wow.
I go back and check in. I'm like, "Hey, Sean, how's it going?" He says, "Going well. Actually, David, our buyer dropped out.
Oh, wow.
Would you be interested in buying our books?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And so, yeah, I mean, that relationship was 5 years before it bore any fruit for like, any sort of partnership. And so I think a lot of these guys out there, I talk to booksellers and other folks every day, and like they think that they're going to reach out and the first 5 people they talk to are all going to say yes. And
Right.
it's not even that they don't say no. It's like they might say no for a very, very long time. And it's all about having that consistency and persistence, right? Because like you have to look at it from the other perspective, right? Like the other person's perspective. And I think that's like one of the most valuable tools as a human, like we could have as a human, is perspective and having a level of empathy to like be able to put yourself into the shoes of the other person.
Yeah.
And when I think back and I put myself in Sean's shoes, I think, oh, wow, this is a really young guy, first off. But number two, I'm thinking, hey, you know what, David, you seem like a nice kid, but I get calls and people asking about this all the time. This is my daily, everyone asks me for my books. And I don't want to just give them to anyone. I want to minimize my work and my headache. And so I'm going to try to focus and work with companies and organizations that are going to stick around, that are going to be consistent, they're going to be reliable, and they're just going to deliver on their promises and expectations. Right. And so, like, from Sean's shoes, I'm like, dude, I don't blame him. Like, I would have given me 5 years too. And I mean, like, that's really the perspective that I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners, and just people have to take, is not what's in it for me, right? Like 23-year-old David was like, oh, like, how can I get books? Yeah. You really have to think of like, okay, well, what's in it for the other side, right? Like, what is the other side thinking? And that's when you start building some traction in, these partnerships. And there really is no shortcut. You have to go through the motions of like understanding where the other side is coming from.
Yeah, very insightful. Most people are just booksellers, and this is get tied to what you just talked about. Most people are just booksellers, like you mentioned. They're just, how can I get the next book? And for good reason. A lot of people are just starting this out as a side hustle. Some people are trying to go full time, but you're right. A lot of people are worried about themselves, and it makes sense. Everyone worried about feeding their family and making sure that they're okay. But clearly, Dream Books has had a mission for a long time. So for those who don't know, Dream Books, you can go to their website. And a very, very nice visual layout. They work with, local charities, with libraries, with anyone who has a lot of books that they don't necessarily want to throw away, right? And so your mission is clearly stated, like, hey, our goal is to not have these books end up in a landfill. Like, let's actually get them back in the hands of people. We'll try to salvage any money we can from selling them, but we'll also try to donate back and give books to schools for free if we need to. I guess my question for you is, like, how important has having that mission been in building the relationships, building your network, and being successful?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It sort of ties to what I was saying before with hiring a great team. Yeah. Unless you have a direction, outcome, and intention, people get confused, man. One of the first things I asked you when I sat down, we started this conversation is like, hey, what's the goal? What's the objective of this podcast?
Yeah.
In all relationships, even romantic ones, platonic ones, business relationships, there has to be some sort of intention or objective or goal in mind.
Yeah.
And to answer your question, having a mission is, I'd say, the most important thing. It's like when you hop into a car or hop on your bike to go somewhere, like, the most important thing is like figuring out, hey, where you're going. And if it's going for a long ride around the park, like, that's where you're going. Yeah. You're not going to hop on your bike and just start pedaling without knowing where to go. So yeah, I'd say having a mission is number one. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. Very awesome. So at some point, obviously you had to transition from working in the business, being the one that scanned the books, maybe being the one who solely went out and tried to develop these partnerships, to actually working on the business, especially now that you expanded 20 plus employees. So can you give us a little background, like when did you actually make that shift? Kind of what were the challenges in making that shift? And do you still kind of, the things that you miss about being there, scanning books, or being on the line and touching the books and things like that?
Yeah. There's so many great books out there and great resources about not working in the business, but working on the business. E-Myth sort of popularized that.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that book, again, just like a few years into building my company. And I was like, all right, I'm going to work on my business. And, like, I did the best that I could at the time. Like, I'd spend a day a week just trying to figure out where I was going with this thing. And that was my way of practicing working on my business as opposed to working in my business. Now, looking back, I was still very much working in my business to my standard today because, like, I didn't have a manager in place. And so, I was spending this time like thinking about my business or strategic, goals and visions. But that was in between shipping items, and that was, in between telling everyone what they need to do, managing people, like, micromanaging and doing all that. And so I guess for me, the transition was more gradual. Like it probably is for a lot of people where, it wasn't one day David's working in the business and then boom, the next day, I'm working on the business. And it was way more gradual than that.
Gotcha.
And, earlier this year, I brought on a partner for the first time in 14 years. And,
Wow.
he and I have been working together now for the better part of a year. And I would say this year has really been the first time in 15 years where I've had not only the opportunity, but like the room and the capacity to be able to step away
Wow.
from the day to day of the business and really work on the business as opposed to in the business.
Gotcha.
And so, but needless to say, like 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, when I was, I had a manager in place and I could step away from the business for a week or two at a time. I was still working on my business, but it wasn't to the magnitude that I am able to now. And so I'm really grateful for partnerships. And again, just it goes back to the first secret sauce that I mentioned, 20, 30 minutes ago is building a great team, finding those people. And do you watch sports at all, Joji?
Yeah, I do. I watch quite a bit of baseball, actually. Yeah.
All right, right on. So, I mean, this analogy of business and sports works perfectly actually with baseball because, you have the head coach. Well, you have a manager and then you have a head coach and then you have like a pitching coach and, you have all these. Yeah, there are a lot. I mean, there's a lot of support staff and then you got the players, you got players. Sure, every now and then you get players like Otani who can do a little bit of everything, but most of the time, you're finding these players based on their individual strength. Are they good?
Right.
Are they a good pitcher? Are they a good batter?
Right.
And, like it's so important to like build your team. Dude, like I think people try to reinvent the wheel too much. It's like pick your favorite team, whatever it might be, whether it's sports or in business, or it might even be military or whatever. Like look at a really well-functioning team and the fundamentals are still the same. The foundational sort of core tenets are still the same, which is, number one, there has to be a team vision. The team vision in baseball is to win the season, win the World Series. And then I think there are departmental visions, right? Like developing players so that within 2 seasons, they're an all-star or whatever.
Right.
And then, having great coaches and training staff in place to be able to develop those characters, having the right, marketing arm to make all these strategic partnerships with, Gatorade or Nike or Under Armour or whatever, in order to make sure that you can raise some revenue in order to continue to do the work that you're doing. Dude, honestly, when I think of my time in the last year of working on the business as opposed to in the business, like I've really been focusing my energy on really building our company in the way that for me it's basketball. So I'm just like I want to build it like I'd be building, love them or hate them, like the Bulls, the 90s Bulls or the Lakers, and just like building these dynasties, right? Like what led to that? And you had Jordan, these all-star players, but you also had to build this great supporting staff around them.
Right.
So that's what I've been working on for the last year. But yeah, it was, to answer your question, it was definitely more transitional and gradual.
Cool. Now, at some point, you opened up a bookstore. You actually meaning you have a physical bookstore, book front there in Denver, Colorado. So if I'm ever in Denver, I'm definitely going to check it out. I've seen some pictures online. Looks awesome. I'm curious, kind of what were your thoughts for opening up a storefront? Because, I mean, let's be honest, you're selling on Amazon, you're selling on eBay. You obviously are trying to divert the books that you have into ways so they don't end up in landfills. But it's not like something you had to do per se. But I'm curious, how does that storefront connect with the community? What was your thought process about starting one? And if you could just tell us about that story, I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually my third stab at a bookstore.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the first bookstore, I didn't personally open it, but my mom and a business partner opened the first bookstore I was involved in back in 2009. This was a year after I'd started my company, Dream Books.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, they were looking to essentially find a place for all the books that I didn't want, right? And so I'd go to these Goodwill auctions and buy thousands and thousands of books only to take, back then 10, 20% of those.
Right.
And, all the rest of the books, being a teenager at the time, I would just like leave them all around the house, and our house was a mess, But my mom and the business partner saw an opportunity to take these books and to try to sell them in a bookstore. So they opened up a bookstore in Inglewood, Colorado called Fireside. And this was back in, 2009, finally opened up. And it was a beautiful bookstore, had a cafe in it. We had,
nice.
so many lovely customers throughout the years. We eventually closed that down in 2013. And at that point, I'd been managing it for about a year or two. Okay. And, doing that school and Dream Books. And, I was like putting in 100+ hour weeks. Wow. So yeah, I mean, that was my first stint at the bookstore. And, it chewed me up, spat me out. It was a grueling experience. Brick and mortar is an entirely different beast than e-commerce. And this third step at the bookstore, it's no different. I thought I learned, I thought I was able to take it on. And right now, like the bookstore, it's open. It's a lovely bookstore. And, we have many customers who come in. But I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, it's an easy way to monetize books. Right. It's a gimme, because it's really not. And at this point, the only reason we do have it open is we do have a program where, number one, the books are priced very inexpensively. And so they're at a price point that is accessible to pretty much everyone.
Yeah.
And then number two, this is something that we've done since the first bookstore that we opened up, but we have a store credit for teachers where every month they can come in and get $50 worth of free books. And so,
that's awesome.
And not just only, educators in public schools, but also if you're a homeschool, if you're doing homeschool or any educator, period, we're not going to really be sticklers about it, but we want to figure out a way to give back to the community in that way. To be honest, it's so much energy and effort and resources in order to keep this thing open. But the only reason we're doing so at this point right now is, again, it's that bridge for our company to connect with the community, direct community around us. And so, that's the story of the bookstore.
That's awesome. Very cool. I know from a previous interview from an Instagram Live, I think that you did maybe a couple of years ago. That's a long time ago. You had said that when account suspensions started happening because of the counterfeit textbook, fiasco, you actually transitioned to basically 70-30, 70 being eBay, 30% being Amazon. I'm just curious, can you walk us through, because my account also got suspended back in 2021. Early in January, I had 3 test buys out by ONZ Law, and wasn't sure if the books were actually counterfeit or not because they didn't, expand and give me proof that they were necessarily counterfeit. But I'm curious if you wouldn't mind, and feel free to share as much or as little as you want, kind of what happened to your account, because you are a bigger seller, and I think it's a different perspective than it is from maybe people who are smaller like me.
Yeah, absolutely. In the 15 years I've been in business, I have had the unfortunate, opportunities of having my account shut down so many times. And I say unfortunate opportunities because, at the time, each shutdown really does sting. I mean, you want to talk about the worst thing as a business, you cannot generate revenue. That's pretty bad, right?
That's terrible.
Yeah. And so we've had our accounts suspended, numerous times throughout the year for one reason or another. And, every single one of those were instances that we could have proactively avoided.
Oh, okay.
And we've had suspensions on both Amazon and eBay and other marketplaces. And so it's not just an Amazon issue.
Yeah.
The worst suspension wasn't the one for counterfeit textbooks.
Wow.
I'd say the worst suspension was one I don't even remember what it was for, but I think it was for having too high of a cancellation rate. And we were suspended for about 3 weeks, and which in itself is pretty bad. But what made it especially tough was that happened just after we had moved into our second warehouse. And this warehouse that we moved into, we had just purchased it. And so our the mortgage payments were starting to come due, and it was twice the space of our previous space. And so, more than twice the rent as well. And so it just came at the wrong time. And fortunately, we just finished closing the warehouse, and we still had extra liquidity available because we didn't use 100% of the down payment that we were anticipating we would need, because I don't know how if you're familiar with SBA loans at all, but in a typical loan, whether it be commercial or residential, if you're buying a building, they want 20%.
Okay.
That's pretty common knowledge, but for a lot of SBA programs, they only need 10%.
Okay.
Which is one of the big advantages of SBA programs. And so, we still had 10% of, half of what we were expecting to use to buy this place. And we burned through that in the 3 weeks that we were suspended. And, it was just like a lifeline. We were just so lucky the timing worked out that way. But that just showed me the importance of having emergency cash. And, having access to cash in a business is so important. So, I think back to these suspensions and going back to these, unfortunate opportunities. Every single time we were suspended, it sucks, but usually after the sting resides, I feel like there's a learning opportunity for sure, and your business gets better because of it.
Yeah. I think, like I said, my account was suspended for maybe about a month back in 2021. And, I'm obviously a much smaller fish. It was a side hustle for me. It wasn't like wasn't my entire life. And I'm not saying that it was for you, but it was obviously much higher stakes for you because this is a company you built, which is actually a company, not like a side hustle, like a real company. You've been working in it for years. And, I think Amazon was holding $8,000 at one point for months. And $8,000 is not a lot of money, but for like a small fish, it's $8,000, $8,000. Like it has money.
I think $8,000 is a decent amount of money.
I appreciate it. And since that moment, my mindset shifted with Amazon because I was like, wow. I told my wife back in the early days, like, Maya, like, why don't I just do Amazon full time? Like, it's really working for me. But as soon as that account shutdown happened and Amazon just said, no, we're not paying you anything, it really showed me that I'm at the mercy of Amazon. And it made me think long term about, definitely investing and diversifying into other things. So I'm curious for you, obviously you have a book business that has a mission, you're well established. Have you ever thought about potentially selling your books through your own means? Like, I know this is very difficult because Amazon and eBay are these massive platforms that drive millions of customers to their website. But in the back of your mind, you're sitting there thinking like, holy cow, Amazon or eBay for that matter, at any point could say, Dave, sorry, man, you're out of business. So kind of what's your thought process around that?
Yeah, boy, even to this day, Amazon, eBay are two very important parts of our business. And like you said, there's no way to avoid that. They just demand tremendous, market share. And so it's I don't want to say impossible, but it's so difficult to not be so dependent on them.
Yeah.
What I will say is, if your business is foundationally built on the transaction on Amazon and eBay and other marketplaces being the core competency of your business. And so again, if the only value that you bring as a business is you offer even more supply and inventory to customers on those platforms, then you're putting yourself at a tremendous risk because again, it's like the only value that you're creating as a company is dependent on someone else's platform.
Yeah.
Right. You're at a big risk. one of the big big decisions that we had to be very intentional in making several years back was, where are we going to put our eggs?
Right.
Where is our core competency going to lie? And so, we made a very intentional decision back then to say, hey, you know what? Amazon, eBay, all these are really important. We're going to still tend to those.
Right.
But our primary focus is going to be on building relationships,
right.
providing much needed services to these community organizations around us.
Right.
And I mean, fortunately, right place, right time. We had the right team. We had, the space. We had the vehicles. We had the tools we needed in order to execute on that vision. But yeah, I mean, here's the thing. All right, so if you're a smaller seller, though, you're not going to go out and buy a massive warehouse, a fleet of trucks, drivers, and
right.
start picking up libraries, books. I think if you're a smaller seller, you need to start day one. I mean, today, and making an intentional decision. Hey, number one, understanding where your eggs are, right? Like, where is your core, where are your core competencies? And if it's literally just selling on Amazon, like if the value you generate as a business, just selling on Amazon, like understand that, embrace that, and like maximize that, right? Because like it is what it is. Like try to make as much money doing that as possible, right? Create as much value as possible. But if you have any sort of other unique advantage, whether it be geographic or maybe like you as a teacher, you have direct access to certain relationships that a lot of others don't. You having your mathematical background, being able to look for seasonal arbitrage opportunities.
Right.
Like I look at you, Joji, and amongst, you have so many different strengths.
I appreciate it.
But I would argue and say that, one of your biggest strengths for book selling is, again, your ability to spot patterns and spot opportunities in arbitrage. And again, that's where you're really leaning on. And that's like, if Amazon shut down your business again, I hope they don't. If they do, you have a path out of that because, again, your value isn't being created just by selling on Amazon. Shoot, right. Man, you could reach out to me and you might say, hey, David, I'm going to help you find thousands and thousands of items that you might not have wanted before. But like you'll be able to sell and I'll help you do that and just give me a cut of that. Like you can do that because, again, your value creation isn't in just selling on Amazon, but it's more so in that knowledge, right?
Right.
And so like, I don't care how small you are. I think every one of us has a unique advantage, a unique set of experiences and capabilities that we can bring to the table to create value. And if not, we know that selling on Amazon, again, just the act of selling on Amazon does create value in itself. Just understand that Amazon really controls the cards at that point, though.
Funny story, you talk about the seasonal book arbitrage. I was just looking at a book that I bought. It's a Christmas book, and I saw Dream Books on the listing. And you guys have priced it according to historically what the book should sell for during December. And I was like, wow, this is awesome. This is a big bookseller that isn't just, I don't know exactly how the repricing, how you guys' repricing work, but this is a book that's usually like between $3 to $5, lowest MF price. And you guys are in the buy box at 25. So awesome. Good for you guys. Going back to what you said about, one of the reasons why I have the YouTube channel and the reason why I have this podcast and the reason why I do lives where I show people how to source is, one of my strengths is being a teacher, right? And I know fundamentally that I'm playing Amazon's playground and Amazon anytime could shut me down. And I'm well aware that there's a good likelihood that in 5 years that my account could be gone forever because I sold textbooks. I still sell textbooks. I try to make sure the best that I can that they're not counterfeit. But at the end of the day, there's really no way for us to 100% guarantee that the textbooks that were right, because even the publishers themselves have difficulty telling when a book is actually counterfeit or not. So I'm fully aware that I might not be there in 5 years. So I guess what I'm trying to do, going back to you asking me in the beginning, like my mission is like, I'm trying to provide value to people who are getting started, who can start this as a side hustle. Because if Amazon does go away from me, at least I have that. Like I can teach people. That's one of my skills, and I have something to lean back on. And now I love the invitation from David to come talk to him and help him out in any way that I can. Not that he needs the help, but I appreciate that as well. Very nice of you. Now, my last question here before we head off, because I know your time is very valuable, is, you talked about efficiency, and at the bulk scale, being a little bit better at something makes massive differences because you're so large. But, most of my audience and most booksellers in Amazon are not at the similar bulk level as you. So what are some, you think, key efficiencies that maybe you think a lot of the smaller sellers could really nail down that could improve their business significantly?
Yeah. One aspect of efficiency that's incredibly important is adaptability.
Yeah.
Just because you're incredible at, like, I don't know, like let's say, just using the sports analogy again, let's say you're incredibly efficient at, like, driving the ball down to the hoop, every time. And you're just, like, incredibly efficient at driving. But let's say you're playing a team that is even more efficient at defending, then all of a sudden that efficiency is no longer a strength. And so again, adaptability is something that's so important when you're thinking about efficiency, because just because you're great at doing one thing one way doesn't necessarily mean it's going to yield the best output. Um, you have to have that sense of adaptability. And I think that level of adaptability is something that everyone can embrace regardless of size. Yeah,
Right.
You're not running a giant warehouse with tons of employees, but you still have the ability to adapt to your current environment.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think the first thing in efficiency is, having a goal in mind, understanding what the desired outcome is. Right. I think there is a sense of documenting and keeping track and measuring, all the tasks. But then I'd say the thing that surrounds all of that, arguably the most important thing is adaptability. Just because, if you're just a machine that can just only do things one way, and let's say, Amazon shuts down your account or something else happens, like, you're no longer efficient unless you can adapt to your new environment. So yeah, man, it doesn't matter how big you are. Again, it's all about adaptability.
Yeah. Wonderful insight. I always get tons from these podcasts, especially from Dave. Dave's someone who is so smart. And I think you're somebody who's very in tune with, how do I say this? Like looking from other people's perspectives and like having a greater worldview, like just being outside yourself. I really appreciate talking with you at the Miami Sellers Conference last February. And I hope that you're going to be there again, because I'm definitely going to be there. And I would definitely want to catch up and chat, because I think you got so much to offer. And just want to say thanks so much for taking an hour out of your day. You're the founder, president of Dream Books. You're doing big things. Where can people find you before we head off?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. Dave can read. It's right here on the bottom corner.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, honestly, one of the things that I really do enjoy is connecting with people and, just having these sorts of conversations. And so I'll be at Miami this upcoming year, and I'll be at a handful of conferences. And so hopefully get to meet everyone then.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the channel. Hope to have you back again in the future sometime, and hope you have a good one. See you, everyone.